Hello everyone, it's Grace and welcome back to my channel. Today the video that I'm going to be bringing you is a dedicated review of Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. Black Sun is a fantasy novel and it is the first novel in the Between Earth and Sky series, which is Rebecca Roanhorse's new series that is inspired by pre-Columbian Americas. Now, I really enjoyed this book, and the way that I'm going to be breaking this review down is that I'm going to talk about the book without spoilers, and then after that I am going to get into some of my spoiler thoughts about the book. So I will make a very clear division when that happens, and so there'll be no worries about getting spoilers for the book. So I think that in order to understand the setup of the novel, it's important to know about the three main characters that we're following, which actually becomes four before the end of the book. So one of the three main perspectives is Nara, who is the sun priest of the Celestial Tower in the city of Tova. So Nara's role as the sun priest is supposed to be quite prestigious and powerful, and they have dominion religiously over the whole continent. But in this city with Nara are four clans that rule the rest of the land of the city. And so those are the Carrion Crow clan, the Winged Serpent clan, the Golden Eagle clan, and the Water Strider clan. And so that's sort of what's going on in the city of Tova. And then we have two other main characters, one of whom is Serapio, who we meet as a 12-year-old boy, and we watch him be blinded. This is not a spoiler, it happens in the first chapter. And he has this very mysterious air about him. He is supposedly being groomed for this destiny, but we don't really know what that is, and we don't really know what he's about. Then finally, the third main perspective that we start with is Ziala. And I loved Ziala, but Ziala is what is known as a Teak, that is her heritage, and so she is a sailor and a ship's captain, and she is brought on board and essentially contracted to travel with Serapio on a ship to the holy city of Tova. And it's very important that you get him there by the winter solstice, which is an important celestial event for the city of Tova. So it kind of leaves you with like this countdown plot where you have Nara, the sun priest in Tova, who is sort of like dealing with everything that's going down in the city, but then you also have Ziala captaining a ship to bring Serapio to the city on a timeline, but you don't really know what's so important about the winter solstice. And so that is kind of where the intrigue starts. I also want to mention the fourth main character that we get some time with. He is not as much of a focus as the other three because we don't get to spend the whole book with him. But our fourth main character is named Okoa, and he is the son of the great family of the Carrion Crow clan. When we meet Okoa, he is away training at War College, but when we meet him, we learn that circumstances are going to bring him home back to the city for reasons. So I'm going to go with a few things that I liked about this book, which I really did like this book, so there is more to like, but then also a couple of things that I maybe didn't like as much, or maybe not even that I didn't like, but that I think some people might view as cons, and just to be aware of them going into the book. So one thing that I really liked about Black Sun was the beginning. The hook was just fantastic. It is mysterious, it is graphic, you are just essentially wondering what the heck just happened, but in a good way where like it spurs you on to the rest of the book to find out what just happened. We spent the first chapter with Serapio, so he was very much part of the mystery of that start, and so just continuing on with him, I really liked a lot of the characters in this book. I really enjoyed Serapio. He's sort of this mysterious figure because he is blinded as a boy, and he's sort of like trained by these tutors. And I thought that that made him really interesting because you don't really know necessarily what his motivations are, but he seems like a good person. And he very much has the feeling of like an outsider where if he could just feel accepted, things might go well for him. And so continuing on with characters that I really liked, Ziala had that same feeling for me where she was regarded as an outsider because, as I mentioned earlier, Ziala has this mysterious Teak heritage that is really, at the start of the book, you're not quite sure what that means for her, but it becomes clear that people from the continent and from the major cities sort of view this type of heritage with suspicion, and they almost seem scared of her, though you're not sure why. And there's sort of some magical abilities teased with Ziala and with Serapio that are kept under wraps a little bit. And so that was part of their characters that I was super intrigued by. The magic I thought was extremely cool. I just wanted to know more about it. I would say that this book has a very soft magic system. Much of the fantasy elements of the world are presented in a little bit more of a whimsical way. Another thing that I liked about the book was the writing style, and I will admit that it took me a minute to get into the writing style. I don't think that I was expecting such straightforward prose, but I think that that's because for some reason I had gone into this thinking that it was historical fiction, which it very much is not. And I feel like I'm more used to seeing like a little bit more lyrical writing applied to historical fiction books, but it really was not. It was straightforward. It was very accessible. And I know that sometimes saying that writing is simple makes it sound like you're saying that it's bad, but it was not that at all. It was not bad. It just took me a second to get into it because I don't think that I was prepared for such a casual tone, I think is the word that I'm looking for. So I would know that going in. There was a lot to like about this book, but I think that I will get a little bit more into it in the spoiler section. And so for now, just a couple of things to know going in that might not be the best, not necessarily like things that are going to ruin the book, because like I said, I really enjoyed the book, but things that might be important to know. The third main character that we start the book with, Nara, it's not that I hated her or anything, but I think it's probably important to know that she, as the Sun Priest, is the epicenter of a lot of political machinations in the book. And normally this would be something I would really enjoy. Like, I really like reading books with political intrigue, political maneuvering. These priests in the Celestial Tower were not a dynamic that I was familiar with, and I was really looking forward to learning about it. But Nara just doesn't seem to have the expertise on the level. Like, if you're going into her perspective hoping that you're going to get all of this political intrigue like I was, I think that you might be a little bit disappointed on that, because I don't think that her perspective was in there to provide a window into like how the politics of this city work, so much that it was in there to just provide a look into what was happening in the Celestial Tower because that was important to the story, if that makes sense. One thing that didn't necessarily bother me so much, but I think it's probably important to know going in, is that this book really felt almost like a prologue or a prequel where like events were set up and what we went through here was necessary to get to a larger plot later. So if you are someone who is like 100% for endings, like if an ending is not going to stick the landing, it can ruin a book for you, that I believe is going to be something that's important to know going in. But on the whole, I really think that this is worth checking out, and I gave this book 4 stars, which means that I really enjoyed it. 5 stars I usually reserve for books that I love. I am guilty of giving out a few too many 5 stars sometimes because there are a lot of books that I love. But 4-star essentially means like a really solid book. Like I enjoyed reading it. And that's what I felt like this book fell into. A couple of the characters were really compelling. The magic system and the like kind of lore of the world was fascinating. And there are a bunch of things that like I really, really want to see explored more, and I want to know more about them. So in that sense, I'm very like, this book did its job in that I want to pick up the sequel. I hope I did a good enough job with the non-spoiler section to give someone who has not read the book an idea of whether they would like to read it. I do want to jump into some spoilers for this book because I have some thoughts. So if you have not read this book, do not watch past this point. Turn back now. But thank you so much for watching if you did make it to this point. But now let's jump into the rest of the video. Returning to this cover, I just think that this is so wonderfully symbolic of what happens in this book. Like, it was gorgeous when you first looked at it, but then once you've read the book and you realize what exactly these things are referring to, like you have the eclipse and, well, I guess you have the black sun, if you will, but I don't think I realized when I first looked at this cover that there's actually a crow depicted on here. Maybe it means that I'm not observant, that's quite possible. So in terms of spoilers, I'm kind of going to go in order. Like, I made notes while I was reading this book, so I'm kind of just gonna go through some of them. Actually, let's put this up here. We got nice and displayed. Yeah? You gonna stay? Anyway. The first one that I wrote down was how intriguing that opening chapter was. Like, I thought it was fantastic. And I know that I mentioned this, but just to go into more detail, like, when Serapio's mother is like defiling his body, like carving a crow into him and sewing his eyelids shut, you're just left being like, is this what like mothers do to their children of this clan? Like, what is going on? So immediately from there, like when we cut away from that, I was like, no, we need to immediately come back to Serapio because I need to know what the heck is going on. My first thoughts when we were introduced to Ziala were, I really didn't know how I was going to feel about her. I wasn't sure whether she was going to be given that depth and room to grow. She just seemed very like blunt and like swears like a sailor type of woman, which I'm not opposed to. I just wasn't sure if that was going to be all that she was, and I was so glad to be so wrong, because immediately when she was given the assignment on the ship and you start to see just like tidbits of her magic sprinkled in, like when she calls her song, you start wondering like, well, what is her song? Like, what exactly does being Teak mean? And even in that same scene, you get to see like some of Serapio's abilities with the crow and how that works. And so I was just drawn in by the magic almost right away. I know that I mentioned in the non-spoiler section that I didn't love Nara, because my first thought when we were introduced to her was, what makes her the Sun Priest? But the fact is that she's been in the Celestial Tower for, we're told, like 20 years. And she should know how things work around there. And she didn't seem like confident or competent at her job. And I was just confused. What it seemed like the whole time was her just being like, oh, like people might be scheming around me, but like, I'm not gonna do anything about it. I get that like maybe she doesn't consider that to be her job, like she's a priest, not a Game of Thrones character, but I really just found it like super incongruous, and it took me out. It took me out of the story. I really didn't understand her. That being said, I did get a little bit more interested in Nara about 2/3 of the way into the book when she escapes from her room, because my thought process was like, yes, you're finally doing something, and I'm glad to see you finally being an active member of your own story, because it really seemed like it was passing her by before. So I mentioned before that I really enjoyed both Ziala and Serapio, and I was beginning to get attached to both of them before we saw them on the ship together, but I really loved the relationship that started forming between them, because nobody knows what to make of Serapio, and understandably so, because I don't think that anyone really understands what happened to him throughout his adolescence, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had some scars from that, like not physical, but like mental. He was essentially abused. But Ziala is treated with distrust and suspicion and discrimination by most people. When they started to find comfort in each other, I was just like, oh, this is the sweetest friendship. And I was ready for it to go romantic, because they both deserve it. Like, they were so sweet, and Ziala telling him stories, that was so cute. They could relate, and they made each other feel like they belonged, and I just thought that that was fantastic. Okay, the scene when Ziala goes to save the sailors that go overboard, oh my god, that was one of my favorite scenes in the whole book, because I felt like I had just been waiting. Like, the hints were there about what her Teak heritage meant, but the fact that it is like essentially a mermaid or a siren, so badass. And the fact that she didn't even know is just fascinating. Like, I need to know where that's going to go, and if there's going to be some more growth with her powers, and if she's going to kind of discover herself. I felt so bad for Ziala when her crew essentially just turned their backs on her. I will admit that I was cheering on Serapio when he had the crows kill them all. It was a little bit gruesome. Like, I didn't read that scene and relish it or anything like that, but I was like, yeah, take him down. So yeah, like I said earlier on in the book, that just the fact that I was so intrigued by the magic, that was like a major payoff in those like sequence of scenes on the boat. I loved it. So now I'll just move into talking about Okoa a little bit. I actually kind of wish that we had more time with him and less time with Nara, because like, I thought that Okoa was really cool. Like, he kind of has this sense of duty, and like, he seems to want to do the right thing, but he was also someone that the cultists were targeting to try and like sort of recruit him, because he could teach them to fight. And I think that he sees the reason why the Otaha would like want to do what they're doing, because of the past ways that the Celestial Tower has treated their clan. And I thought it was a really interesting conflict. Not only that, but his animal companion was fantastic. Benunda, I believe her name was, the giant crow. Obviously they've formed a deep bond. And just the magic of the Odo Seido with Serapio being able to talk to crows, versus like the fact that Carrion Crow still has a relationship with these beasts like all this time later, just makes me wonder if at one point riders and their crows could speak to each other, and if that is maybe some old magic that could be awakened. I think that would be so cool to see. I've been rambling for a while, so I think I'm just going to skip to the ending. I thought that the ending was very abrupt. Like, I didn't think that it was given the time, based on the fact that like we had been counting down to this event for the whole book. We do see Serapio fighting the Sun Priest and the other priests on Sun Rock. Like, we do get to see that, and we get to see the carnage that he's causing. So I didn't feel like there was zero payoff, but that was only a couple of pages of action for what had essentially been built up as the focal point of the whole book. So I just felt like, based on the way the ending was constructed, it is so very clear that this is part of a larger story, because there have got to be plots that split off from here after what has happened at Sun Rock. And overall, it just left me with a lot of questions. So for one, is Serapio alive? I think so, But does he get to become his own man now? Like, since he released Odo Sido, is he free now? Does the god still reside in his body? Does he still need to kill Nara? Like, I thought that she was gonna escape on the merit of that, like, someone was taking her place. It seemed like he could sense that that wasn't the Sun Priest. The other major question was, does the sun stay black? Because obviously, at the climax of this book, and the namesake of the book, the solstice, or the eclipse rather, has not ended. And so that is obviously going to cause some chaos. And I'm very interested to know what happens there. So yeah, those are just a few of the questions that I had after the ending. So if you watched this whole review, I really hope that you enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend Black Sun to any fantasy reader who is looking for a book that is not inspired by your typical Western European setting. I loved a lot of the things that this book did because I thought that they were so different from anything that I had seen before, and I really loved that. So overall, really recommend. I really enjoyed this book, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, and if you really liked it, then maybe you'll consider joining me on my journey and hitting subscribe. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!